Hey guys, how's it going, dude? Here I am back with another video. Netflix recently released Jeffrey Epstein, Filthy Rich. It's a documentary that interviews many people surrounding the Jeffrey Epstein investigation. More importantly, the victims have their chance to say what happened to them, and it gives them an amazing platform to talk about the awful things that they went through. So I binge watched all 4 episodes in order to get this video to you as quickly as possible. I did this because in the past on this channel I have done videos centered around Jeffrey Epstein and why I don't believe that he killed himself, plus all the conspiracy content and true crime stuff on this channel. I thought this would be a perfect video to bring you guys. So this is kind of like a review of the documentary. There will be spoilers because I'll be talking in depth. I made 14 pages of notes and then I had to go through those notes and order them all, because one of my gripes with this documentary is it's very back and forth. 1 minute we're in 1996, the next we're in 2018, then we're back in 2002, then we're over in 2008. It's all over the place, so I had to collect all of this information and then put it in order to make a more linear video for you guys. And I have to say, I wish the documentary was a little bit more linear as well, but we'll get into all of that, my thoughts on the documentary. But I just wanted to say there are spoilers in this video for the documentary, but I'm not being funny. They didn't exactly break much new ground. It's kind of the story you already know, but there were a few tidbits which were mind-blowing, and you were like, oh my goodness, when you heard the perspective from certain individuals on certain parts of this story. But anyway guys, without further ado, let's get into my thoughts on Filthy Rich, the Jeffrey Epstein Netflix documentary. So at its earliest point, the documentary actually takes you all the way back to the 1970s, where we're introduced to a very young Jeffrey Epstein, and it was fascinating, I have to say, because you realise that even when he was a young man in his early 20s, he was still an incredibly manipulative man. He knew his craft very well, even back then at a young age, when you think he'd be starting out and kind of learning the ropes of manipulation. No, this guy has been evil and manipulative from day dot, from the get-go. And he showed early signs back in his college days. He only did 2 years at college and left relatively early, didn't really have any major qualifications to speak of, certainly didn't have a teaching degree, yet managed to blag his way into teaching in a school for 2 years before being swept up into the world of Wall Street. Again, underqualified. He's very intelligent but never applied himself in education, so he needed to blag his way into things. And on Wall Street he said that he went to these universities and got these college degrees and things like this, and they brought him on because he sold himself so well, because he's an incredibly talented salesman. A little bit of sales, let's be honest, is manipulation. You know, manipulating your environment, making things sound maybe better than what they are in order to get the result that you want. And Epstein was definitely brilliant at this. So he's on Wall Street, right? He's climbing his way up the ladder. He's even dating the daughter of the CEO of the company that he is at, when all of a sudden it's found out that he's full of shit. You know, they did a little bit of digging into his past and they rang these colleges and stuff, and they're like, we've never heard of this guy, we don't know who this is. And so they brought it to Epstein's attention. They were going to finish him, they were going to fire him then and there. And then he opened his mouth and he managed to manipulate his way out of getting fired from that company. It shows just how conniving this guy really was. One of the biggest mysteries around Epstein that fascinated me, now this could have been a reveal in the documentary, or it could have just been that I didn't research it as well as I thought I had when I brought it to the conspiracy podcast. I always wondered, where the hell did this guy get his money from? Where did he earn his millions? It was always a bit mysterious. Oh, he earned it in banks, he earned it here, he earned it there, but there was never any like concrete information. In this documentary, they have an interview with a guy who hired Epstein after the Wall Street company, that he then went over to this other company, where his manipulation and his lack of morals were welcomed, because this company were doing a Ponzi scheme, and there Epstein illegally falsified stocks and traded stocks in order to acquire a hell of a lot of wealth. Now obviously eventually the police caught up to them and they were investigated, and this guy that hired Epstein was gonna talk, obviously, to get a lesser sentence for himself, right? And Epstein said to him, look, I know people, I've got strings that I can pull. If you try and drag me down down with you, A, I will not go to prison, and B, I will make things a hell of a lot worse for you. And knowing the nature of Epstein and knowing how manipulative this man was, it did scare the guy out of implicating Epstein in it all. So Epstein got away with falsifying and illegally trading stock in the late 70s just purely through, again, manipulation of people, exercising power that he didn't even really necessarily have back then. But oh my goodness, would he go on to have a hell of a lot of power. So that's where a lot of his money came from. Fast forward to the 80s, where he met a man called Les Wexner. Now, Wexner owned a women's only clothing line called The Limited, which made him an amazing amount of money. It was a great success. He then owned Victoria's Secret and Abercrombie and Fitch. Now, Epstein essentially sold his soul to Wexner and infiltrated Wexner's life in a massive way. There was even allegations and suspicions that Wexner and Epstein actually had a homosexual relationship, although both men vehemently deny those allegations. But Epstein managed to gain control of a lot of Wexner's finances. He stole $46 million from Wexner. Wexner knew about this, never pressed charges. You have to wonder, if a man steals 46 million from you and you refuse to press charges, it kind of raises the question, how much leverage does that man have on you for you to not want to press charges? Anyway, Epstein used his closeness with Wexner to pose as a talent scout for Victoria's Secret. This allowed him to get close to women, many of them on the cusp of being a legal age, and sexually assault them. And this is really where the documentary kind of starts, with the sexual assault. Fast forward to 1996, it goes into the story of two sisters that I've heard before on a podcast. I can't remember for the life of me what the podcast was, but I had heard this story before. Two sisters, they were both promised education and progression of their careers. This was a tool that Epstein used a lot. Listen, if you come with me, if you do what I ask you to do, if you give me massages, etc., I will get you the education you need to be successful. I will put you in the right places. I will give you experience to get into the right colleges. I'll send you around the world traveling so you can have a fleshed out CV to look really appealing to these colleges. This was the tools he used to groom the girls to then eventually sexually assault and rape them. Now, obviously, it wasn't long before the sisters realised just how wrong this was, and they went to the FBI. So back in 1996, they knew what Epstein was up to. And an investigative journalist from Vanity Fair caught wind of this and started digging very, very deep. Too deep, because it got her and the CEO, or chief editor, I do apologise, of Vanity Fair in trouble and threatened. The investigative journalist at the time was pregnant, and the health of her unborn baby was threatened, and Epstein even weirdly threatened her that he would get a witch doctor's curse put on her baby if she didn't drop the investigation. Also, the chief editor or CEO, again, forgive me, I can't remember what he was, but he was high up at Vanity Fair. He received a severed cat's head in his garden and a bullet on his front porch. Safe to say, after the bullet in the cat's head, he dropped the investigation and it was stopped there and then. This is very telling of Epstein and his methods. He would often use his power, exercise this power to threaten people in the journalistic area, victims, even police and politicians. He was never afraid to flex the power and riches that he had. The documentary also talks about the infamous massages through 2002 to 2005. This was, of course, the unbelievable web of underage girls that Epstein had put together. And this was done by preying on vulnerable young girls. And what he would do was he would pay young girls $200. They'd be driven over to his mansion and $200 would be given to them to massage him. But obviously, in that duration, he would sexually assault and rape them. $200 is a lot of money, and was certainly a lot of money to those girls. Some of them did return. Others he actually kind of turned into, for want of a better phrase, pimps, in the sense that he got them to go out and get more young girls. Every young girl that they brought to him, they received $200. $200 apiece. It wasn't long before the police caught wind of this. This was because a stepmother of one of the girls told her everything, and so the stepmother went to the police and said, look, this old man in West Palms Beach is getting girls over to his mansion and they are massaging him for $200. This is disgusting, blah, blah, blah. So they launch an investigation, and what they find is they interview one girl, and then they'll say that they told these girls to go, and then they'll interview those girls, and then they told other girls to go. And so all of a sudden, this massive web of girls telling girls to go and making money off of Epstein and being molested by Epstein and all sorts comes to light. Now, some of the girls were directly implicated into the crimes of Jeffrey Epstein in the police's eyes, because some girls brought as many as 60 other girls to Epstein, and it did raise a very interesting question. You know, these girls that were bringing other girls to Epstein, a lot of them were just simply getting a girl and dropping her off and then taking the money and leaving. And it kind of asked the question, were they victims or were they actually guilty of facilitating Epstein? I personally do believe that they were victims that were groomed and probably fearful of an incredibly rich and powerful man and what he might do if they didn't do as he asked. But that is a question I would like to ask you guys down in the comments. What do you think? Just a side note, Ghislaine Maxwell, without a doubt, right-hand woman to Epstein, Epstein's girlfriend, his number 2. She allegedly sexually assaulted girls alongside Epstein. She facilitated Epstein. She brought girls to Epstein. She organised many things behind the scenes. She denies ever seeing Epstein do anything, which is unbelievable considering they were side by side for the majority of their relationship, and all of the victims by name mention Ghislaine so many times and how she groomed them and how she got them involved. It really did paint Ghislaine Maxwell in an awful light, and I do hope that justice is served to that woman. So anyway, back to the investigation. The police raided Epstein's house, and somehow Epstein was tipped off. So they didn't find anything concrete. All the security camera footage was taken out of the building prior to the raid, including hard drives as well. But what they did find was very bizarre. The artwork in the house. A lot of nudity, a lot of sexualization in these images, but also seemingly very, very young girls. It was kind of like a glimpse into the mind of Jeffrey Epstein. Now, shortly after this, the FBI actually seized control of the entire investigation and promised the victims protection and justice. Neither of these promises came true. 2 years later, in 2008, Epstein was finally brought to trial. And unbelievably, to the disgust and shock of the prosecution, as the trial was about to begin, the defense and Jeffrey Epstein stood up and went over to the judge's bench. And shortly afterwards, Jeffrey Epstein was given 18 months for one case of soliciting prostitution, and there was no case to be held against him from the prosecution. A plea deal had been done behind closed doors with no interaction from the prosecution whatsoever. Epstein had managed to do a deal with the federal government without anybody knowing. This was unprecedented, this was unbelievable, and more shocking than that, which made my jaw drop, was that the plea deal included immunity from any other charges from any other states for Epstein, and even more shockingly, immunity for any associate of Jeffrey Epstein in these crimes, both known and unknown, i.e. Prince Andrew and Bill Clinton. Guys like that, they're immune from any trials involving Jeffrey Epstein. In a plea deal where he could have got 50 years in prison, he gets 18 months, which he served 13 months of, immunity, and immunity for all of his friends. That shows, more so than his death and suicide, that shows how powerful this invisible paedophile ring that pulls all the fucking strings in society really is. The fact that they can get immunity, alright, yeah, Jeff, just take the fall for 18 months in prison, which, by the way, that was a joke. He was in a secure facility where he had the cell door open all of the time. He had no other prisoners around him. He had a TV room. He had the best food that other prisoners didn't get. And he got a work release, which meant from 8 AM to 8 PM in the evenings, he was allowed to leave the prison and go to work, as long as he had a deputy with him that he had to pay $48 an hour for, which obviously he did. But this deputy must have disappeared because apparently Epstein just carried on trafficking and abusing women throughout his prison sentence, because he wasn't at prison at all. He just had to check in at 8 PM and sleep there. This just shows the rich and powerful and the people that seem to be in this paedophile ring, elite paedophile ring, are above the law. Now obviously we're gonna get to Epstein's suicide in a moment, and I'll delve back into this, but I just thought that was shocking. So obviously he is later released from prison, 13 months, because of good behaviour. He was barely in the prison to misbehave. But anyway, he throws a party. Prince Andrew turns up, because of course he does, because Prince Andrew, allegedly, possibly, maybe, don't sue me, is a fucking nonce who is being protected by the Queen, which blows my mind that this archaic monarchy, can you tell I'm not big on the monarchy anyway, can protect a blatant paedophile. Anyway, safe to say, because of this dodgy trial and poor prosecution, lawsuits were filed, and it delved into what actually was going on, and it was damning for the FBI and the district attorney, who was Costa at the time, who will come into this again in a little while. Costa is actually the key to bringing down Epstein. But friendly back and forth between federal government workers and the defense of Jeffrey Epstein were given back and forth for this plea deal to come about. It was definitely a sweetheart deal, because for some reason, which is still unknown, Epstein had the power and the leverage to literally sway the federal government into the most obnoxious and ridiculous sentence, I think, possibly ever given in American history. After this, because obviously he was free for a number of years, it delves into his island in the Virgin Islands. It interviews some workers that were there, which is very telling and damning for Prince Andrew, let me tell you that, and Bill Clinton, and also some residents. And one guy is on his yacht, obviously very rich and all the rest of it. He's got a house in the Virgin Islands. But he just out of nowhere just says, I do want to say Jeffrey Epstein does not reflect the other residents on this island. It's like, well, all right, mate, no one was suggesting that, but now you've come out and blatantly said that, it's a bit weird. I'm starting to think that maybe every now and then you used to knock on Jeffrey's door to see who he had round. But yeah, also the worker, you know, he said that he saw Jeffrey with underage girls. He said he saw Bill Clinton at the house, when Bill Clinton swears blind he never went to the island. But then Bill Clinton also swears blind that he didn't have sexual relations with Monica Lewinsky, and we all know how that went. But at least Monica Lewinsky was legal, Bill. You've also got Prince Andrew and the picture of him with that 17-year-old blonde girl. You've probably seen it, I'll flick it up here. He denies ever doing anything sexual with that girl. Well, this worker at the island claims that he saw Prince Andrew around the pool with that girl, and he was grinding on her while she was topless, which goes against what Prince Andrew, brackets, the nonce, allegedly, possibly, maybe, definitely has said in the press. But then again, if you want a good laugh, watch Prince Andrew's interview on TV that he organised himself and put what should have been the final nail in his coffin. But of course, Mummy, the Queen, is protecting him. All I will say, Andrew, is unfortunately for you, when it comes to these allegations on the island, there is no Pizza Express in the Virgin Islands for you to bullshit your way out of it. That island was just a place of absolute horrors. It was a place where Jeffrey Epstein and his friends sexually assaulted and raped many, many underage girls and women. Every now and then in the documentary, it goes from an interview perspective. I think it might be the deposition or the trial, where the prosecution is asking Jeffrey Epstein questions. And I have to say, this is one of my favourite parts of the documentary, because it shows just how arrogant and evil this man really is, and how untouchable he believed himself to be. I believe it's from like 2012, something like that, or it might have been later. It was a little bit hard to follow, but he is asked questions, and every time he's asked a question, his defence instantly leaps up up and says, objection, Your Honor, harassment, argumentative statements, things like that, and you just think it's really not. It's just asking him a straight question, and you just kind of think, how the hell did the defense sleep at night knowing that Jeffrey Epstein is most definitely guilty? But then again, the amount of money he has probably helps him sleep a little bit sounder, I guess. But there's a great moment where the prosecution tries to dig into Epstein's narcissism, because apparently Epstein has an egg-shaped penis. He has a bit of a chode, which is hilarious because the man is an evil fucking paedophile. And you can see this really knocks Epstein for six, to a point where his defense tries to adjourn the conversation and Epstein actually stands up to leave because he is so taken back by what the prosecution has just said. But other than that, most of the time whenever he's asked a question, he simply recites his 4th, 5th and I think 14th Amendment right to not speak, which to me I think shows signs of guilt, but apparently shows signs within the amendment of innocent, because you don't have to answer. But then if you're innocent, why wouldn't you? But there's also one moment which is actually quite terrifying, where the prosecution brings up that for one of his birthdays, one of his best friends got Jeffrey Epstein 3 12-year-old French girls for him to sexually abuse as a birthday present. Now, the defense obviously objects to this, and before Epstein can do his classic I recite my amendment rights, he actually laughs and says that he would love to answer this question. However, the defense have said that he should blah 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 amendments rights, right? It's just like, wow, you're actually enjoying this in a really weird, fucked up way. It's just that moment was very, very chilling. But anyway, let's get on to the election of Donald Trump, because funnily enough, that is the beginning of the downfall of Jeffrey Epstein. Why? Costa, the previous district attorney, is put into some Labour position within the Trump administration. This shines a light on him, and then it shines a light on the investigation, and then it shines a light on the plea deal that he caved and gave to Epstein. And the new district attorney's office realizes how abhorrent this decision was. It led to Costa resigning, and it led to a new trial and these immunities being flipped on its head. And all of a sudden, with a very serious trial on Epstein, all of Epstein's friends disappear. Bill Clinton hasn't seen Epstein in 10 years apparently, even though he's been on his plane 26 times in that 10-year period and been on his island. But whatever you say, Bill. Donald Trump hasn't seen him in 15 years. Prince Andrew was never really close to him anyway and hasn't seen him in about 8 years. Righto, Andy, mate, there's a lot of pictures, videos and testimonies that say otherwise, but at least your mum's the fucking queen. Jeffrey Epstein was arrested for sex trafficking. They raided his $77 million mansion, and this time he wasn't tipped off, he wasn't ready for it, and they found mountains of evidence against him, and his pictures and videos of his victims, child pornography, diamonds and fake passports, which they theorised was for an escape plan. But of course, before Epstein could be trialled, questioned and give evidence against this network of paedophiles, powerful, rich people, he committed suicide in August of last year, 2019, allegedly, possibly, maybe. I don't think so. There is mountains of evidence, in my opinion, that I have seen that say that man did not kill himself, but he was in a maximum security prison. There's no way they could have got to him. These people are above the law. These people are so rich and powerful, we cannot even fathom it. And the fact that they killed Jeffrey Epstein proves that. The fact that they killed him in such a way that it was blamed on a hanging, and then all of the autopsy and evidence shows that it couldn't have been him leaning forward to hang himself. There's so many reasons why that was not the case, and they want us to know that, because by knowing that they can kill someone in front of the world and be, actually it was a suicide, but everyone's like, we know it's not, shows how powerful they really are, and shows that they should be feared, because they can make you fucking disappear in broad daylight, if you like, in the public spectacle, and not give a fuck. That was the biggest what the fuck are you gonna do about it I think I have ever seen. Jeffrey Epstein, in my opinion, did not kill himself, and the biggest tragedy from that is that the victims didn't get their day in court where they could express to Jeffrey Epstein the damage that he has done, and possibly there might have been a minimal 0.0001% chance that that sociopathic, narcissistic cunt might have just felt a shred of guilt for what he did to those women. But whatever happened to Jeffrey Epstein took that away from the victims, and that is the biggest tragedy here of that man's death, that he will not rot in prison for what he has done, and that he will not see justice and hear the extent of the damage he has done to those victims. But to me, after this documentary, it was clear that Epstein was a jigsaw piece in a much wider, much bigger, rich, powerful paedophile jigsaw, right? For want of a better fucking analogy. We don't know if he was a tiny piece. We don't know if he was a fucking huge corner piece. We don't know if he was the centerpiece. He could have been an irrelevant piece for all we know. But the fact that throughout his life he exercised incredible power, he exercised unbelievable manipulation skills. This man was truly one of the most evil men to ever walk this earth, and I fear that there were people above him that make him look like a baby shark in comparison. But we don't know. Will we ever know? I have no clue. But the documentary itself, I enjoyed it. I didn't like how it wasn't linear. I didn't like how it chopped and changed and went backwards and forwards all the time, but that's just me. I understand why they did it, because they'd be going to a certain bit and then they'd recall back to fill in that piece. But for me, I just prefer things more linear. Let me know what you think. I do think, even though I've spoiled it all here for you now today, guys, you should definitely go and watch it. I'm sure you'll go and do it anyway, or maybe you've watched it and just wanted to hear what I had to say about it. I did thoroughly enjoy it. It's a case that does fascinate me. It's certainly going to be considered a very, very dark piece of our human history. And I actually have a list here in my 14 pages of notes. I've got a list of pros and cons, which I'm just going to quickly read to you guys. Okay, so the pros, these are my thoughts on the documentary. It gives unprecedented perspectives into the entire story. You get both perspectives from the prosecution and defense in the trials. I thought that was very interesting. The victims were given an enormous platform for their voices to be heard. It goes into immense detail in almost every aspect of the Jeffrey Epstein case. Really showcased the level of manipulation that Jeffrey Epstein had. It gave insight into how he acquired his wealth. It could have just been poor research on my part, but I always found it a bit of a mystery. It showed the raw power and sway Jeffrey had with government officials and the justice system. It exposed the depravity of Epstein and some of his counterparts, Ghislaine Maxwell, Andrew, Bill Clinton, etc. It was nicely shot and there was good pacing. The cons, back and forth rather than a linear approach. It kind of wrote off the Epstein didn't kill himself conspiracy, even though they had the specialist in saying that 3 fractures not being consistent with the type of hanging shown. Overall, it is another amazing Netflix documentary that I would highly recommend. Jeffrey Epstein was one of the most evil men I've ever had the displeasure to research, but I fear the people in the puzzle, of which Epstein was probably a small piece, may be much worse. I personally believe Epstein was killed by the immensely rich and powerful people he associated with and trafficked for. Also, Prince Andrew, justice is coming for you, mate. Sweet one, geese.